right, guys, hopefully this works. I've been having some technical difficulties ever since I installed a new cooler onto my PC. It's way quieter, but there's still some quirks I need to iron out. But regardless, the whole point of that is, of course, to make it so that I don't hear the fans spinning up as loudly with open back headphones. So there were audiophile reasons for upgrading the cooling in my system. Nice to see everybody in the chat there. How's everybody doing today? I see some familiar names, of course. Pelpan, how's it going? Marius, good to see you. Titian, of course. Lots of folks in the chat today. So what I figured, today we don't have any guests. It's just me. We are in the process of moving everything to the new studio space, but so I'm just still here in my home office. But that's why you see not as much stuff there in the background. I've been over time moving stuff. But also I just didn't work out with the guest today because everybody is sort of all over the place and a little bit busy. So I figured I would just do one myself, and we can just dive right into a straightforward Q&A. I didn't have any particular subjects that I wanted to cover. I just wanted to get a chance to connect with you guys and answer some questions if you guys have any. So without further ado, let's get into it. And I do want to mention again that we do have the super chat function, but don't feel like you have to use it in order to get your questions answered. We will still try I'll still try to answer all questions, but if you really do need a question answered and we miss it, that's one way to get it noticed. I see the first question here. Wait, I always make assumptions about the chat to come based on the headphone being worn. It's a good, it's a good assumption because I think that's usually the case. But in this case, it just happened to be the headphone that I wanted to wear, the one I wanted to use. And actually, it's probably worth just bringing that up because I think there's often an assumption that there's a certain kind of agenda that goes towards, covering a given headphone or an amplifier or something. But for every reviewer and creator that's on the channel, nobody's had that agenda. Nobody's had this is the thing that I'm going to talk about because it's really important. For right now, I mean, there are times when a brand new product comes out and we're like, oh, we got to cover it. But the reason for that is because we're excited for it. It just happens to be the case that sometimes we cover the hyped products like the Gold Planer GL2000 or something else. But there really is no rhyme or reason to, when we're wearing headphones on live streams, when it's just, us like Audiophiles Anonymous or just myself, we're just, wanting to listen to that on that day. So at least as far as I can tell, I mean, maybe when we've had the other guys on, maybe there was a reason for that. Or like when we did the Focal live stream, it made sense that we'd wear Focal headphones. But I think in the last live stream I did on the Sundara, I wasn't wearing the Sundara, so I don't really think there's a rhyme or reason to it. Okay, I'd love to hear about the Clear MG. Yeah, that's actually the one behind me there, Clear MG Pro right there. I could probably take it out of the case. Let me just give you guys, actually, this is not a condenser mic, it's a dynamic mic, so you're not going to get as good ASMR out of that. So this is the Clear MG Pro, and you do get extra set of pads here. I'm going to have to actually measure both pads. I've already measured this, but I need to measure it with these other pads. Just because I'm curious how much of a difference is down to the pads and how much of a difference is just the headphone itself. Now, I unfortunately can't talk about what I can't talk about, but at the moment, all I can really give is a distinction between the Clear MG Pro and the original Clear. I can't give you any distinction between the Clear MG Pro and the Clear MG. As you guys know, the original Clear had it was the same headphone as the Clear Pro, just with different accessories. At least that was the intention. And what I don't know is if that same idea has carried over for the Clear MG and the Clear MG Pro. So, I mean, it's a bit weird because the release date is different, and the Clear MG is not out yet, so I can't talk about it. But I can talk about the Clear MG Pro. The Pro, compared to the original Clear, is a little warmer, a little more relaxed in the lower treble. It's at least this one, and it's got a little bit less ear gain there, and it is a little bit bassier as well. Now the upper treble on the Clear MG Pro is still a little bit more emphasized as well. So it still sounds good, but imagine like you take the regular Clear and then you kind of relax some of the lower treble and then make it more like kind of U-shaped. That's kind of how I would describe it. And to be perfectly honest, I prefer the original Clear. That's just my preference there. Okay, let's get into more questions here. Odin or U12T for classical and jazz? Oh man, I'd almost lean towards the Odin there. I would say U12T for anything that's more upbeat, or has like electric guitars. The U12T is the way to go because it's got a little bit more relaxed upper mids, and so it's just a little bit smoother and easier, less fatiguing there. Whereas the Odin's a little bit more forward in that range, and but it does really well for classical and jazz. So for those genres, I'd definitely go with the Odin. Particular if they do a consumer one. Yeah, exactly, right? Like this is all just assuming that what's happened in the past is what is going to happen in the future with the Pro here, or the MG Pro, right? If anything, it would have made more sense to kind of swap the timing of the release. I just don't get that, but hey, they're doing what they want to do, right? And keep in mind, it's meant for different audiences, and it's a different SKU. So, but I don't. There's nothing I can say about a non-Pro version of this. So, question: impressions on the Focal Clear versus Clear MG. Again, I can only talk about the Clear MG Pro. And I don't know if there's meant to be a difference. So I've inquired, but I don't have an answer for that yet. Titian asks, do you have... Oh, is my camera still working? If my camera stops working, let me know. Titian asks, do you have DAC/amp recommendations for the Celeste? I think a bit warmer, like IFI? You mean a little bit more smooth over? Again, unless there's something specifically going on in the analog domain that changes the frequency response, I'm not somebody who likes to use the terms like warmer and brighter, even though I totally get why people make those claims. Because... Oh, is it clipping a bit? Let me turn that down. Shouldn't be. Yeah, okay, I'll turn it down a little bit. Okay, let me know how it is now. But yeah, I get why people make those claims about warmer and brighter for amps and sources and stuff like that, because there is a sense that your attention gets drawn to treble frequencies with certain source equipment, and there's a sense in which your attention might get drawn a little bit more strongly to the lower frequencies. And I think that's really what people are describing when they're describing warmer versus brighter, because I don't really think, at least for linear stuff, it's not meant to be it's not meant to change the frequency response. Marius, thank you, my friend. Gas station coffee on you. I appreciate it, man. That definitely helps my mornings. Okay, so but to get to your question there, Titian, any DAC amp recommendations for the Celeste? It doesn't really change that much depending on the source, but you would probably notice DAC differences there more than any differences on amplifiers, as long as it's good enough. And so with that said, I would go with any standard source that's good, like at least a Modi Magni combo or something like that, and that would be fine. But I have the feeling that you're looking for something a little bit more, because knowing you, I have the feeling you're looking for something a little bit more, a little higher end. And in that case, I mean, I like the Matrix X Saber Pro, but I also like the Sonko's LAQXD1. I like the ESS based stuff with the ES9038 Pro. So the Matrix X Super Pro has that, as long as it's implemented in a way that doesn't have any intermodulation distortion, because then you get all the benefits of the analytic presentation without any of the grating or glaring qualities that plagued those in the past. So that, I think, is, at least for off-the-shelf DACs, that's my pick. I know a lot of people really love the Shield Audio Bifrost. I haven't heard whatever revision they're on right now with that. I heard an old one a long time ago. But yeah, definitely the Bifrost would be one to look into. And then for amps, really you just want to make sure you have something that's versatile enough for the low impedance, slightly more sensitive headphones. They're not, like Sennheiser 300 ohm stuff. They're quite easy to drive. And in some sense, you could almost get away with a DAP for the Celeste, but really any source that you don't get any noise floor would be fine. I would say that a tube amp would do well with it, but as you don't want to get a tube amp that has high output impedance. You want fairly low output impedance there. So because it will change the frequency response I'm pointing at the Focal Clear MG Pro, but on the Celeste, it'll change the frequency response if you mess with output impedances. And I think you probably don't want that because, I don't know, for me at least, I don't want more mid bass. I think it has totally the right amount of mid bass there. And yeah, as a result, I prefer running it off of low output impedance sources. And when you do run it off a high output impedance source, you're going to get more mid bass there. All right, let me just back up here and get more of these questions. Atticus or Icon for someone who loves their TH900? Probably. Okay, this is a question for Metal571 because he says that the Icon slams harder than the Atticus, but Zach says that the Atticus slams harder than the Icon. So I don't know. Ask Metal. Headphones equivalent to Monarch. The Monarch, it's funny. It's going to depend who you ask because the Monarch very closely follows the 2019 Harman IEM target. Very closely. It doesn't perfectly match it, but at least as far as the bass shelf and the way that presentation happens is very close. So if you were to imagine that there was some similarity between that target and the over-ear target, which there isn't, I know, but if you imagine that there is, and there are very interesting reasons why they don't match, it has to do with the fact that the 711 couplers are two parts that aren't meant to be separated from one another. And so when you bypass one of them, you get something that looks a little bit different in the bass. And that supposedly explains the differences there. At least that's the conversation that I've been having with Jude, who is much more knowledgeable than I am on that subject. But very, very interesting stuff. Regardless, if you were to draw that analogy over with Harman-tuned headphones or something like Harman with that kind of bass shelf, for an over-ear headphone, that's tough to say. Maybe the Focal Radiance, because it does have that same lower mid-range dip there and bass boost. So I think the Focal Radiance is actually going to be something kind of like that. I know Kryn doesn't like Focal's closebacks, but yeah, I think he just doesn't like closebacks in general, which is fine. I mean, I agree with his assessment, but I disagree with the valence of the assessment. He is somebody who I think is trustworthy generally. I can't think of anything else. I mean, I guess the question would be if you're looking for open back or closed back, because really with open back, there's nothing that you're going to find that matches that bass shelf and the way that bass shelf is handled without EQ. So I would say just get, look into an Odyssey LCD2F and then EQ it in the bass, in the sub bass to kind of match that. Let's see. Why do you think Focal has presented the Pro version first for the nuclear line? I have no idea. I mean, I don't know if it's a bad idea. I think this is just something that probably I'm not thinking about, but I don't know. Hair loss. Yeah, I mean, that's the nature of getting older, man. What would be the next noticeable step up from the HE4XX, HD6XX with O2 ODAC? I love the sound signature of both. HD6XX is a little warmer with a bit of bass bloom there, and like mid bass bloom, and then the sub bass roll off. But the detail on the HD6XX is outstanding. I would say, like, okay, I don't think it's a logical step to go from those up to a Sundara, but the next step up from the 6XX is the Sundara and an amplifier. In your case, though, because you already have the 6XX and the 4XX, I would go with a Focal Alex or Focal Alir with the clear pads, or go with a Hi-Fi Man Ananda, because that would be a more meaningful step up from both of those. High Resolve, I'm stuck between Focal Celesti and ZMF Icon, also considering Kennerton. Can't really recommend Kennerton. I know there's one in the background right now, but I will not be doing a review of that. It's not that it's bad. It's just I'm not doing a review of it. Between those two, Celesti and Icon. All right, Celesti is more detailed, but the Icon has better soundstage and better sense of space. So if you're really concerned about soundstage and you're put off by that, like the way the Kryn was, then I would say Icon. But for total balance, the Celesti is excellent, and it also is it's more technically impressive for detail. But the Icon is also more expensive, isn't it? Like, I think if I were to choose between the two, I would have a really hard time, because I appreciate the qualities of the Icon, and it is also like it's a very nice tuning as well there. So I think the Icon sounds a little closer to an open back. So if that's your reference point, then maybe the Icon. But if you want, if you're okay with a intimate presentation, I do like the Celesti's detail better, and the punch is also pretty good on it. Have you compared MG Pro to Clear and Utopia yet? Yeah, not Utopia, but Clear. Yeah, and I like the original Clear better than the MG Pro. But that's just me. Maybe somebody wants the U-shape kind of thing. I see. Ico, thank you for the $5. People always base their amp/DAC on their headphone. What if this is reversed? I have a topping A90 and D90. Which headphones can I pair with it? Aria owner. Oh man, I have an upcoming video that might be disappointing for you. I was not a huge fan of the A90. It really did not sound... Well, there were two reasons why I wasn't a fan of the A90. The first is that you have to run it balanced in some configurations because it has a ground loop issue. The second, and so you get a noise floor there. The second issue that I had with it was more to do with the sound quality, in that it sounded super undynamic. Like, not like compressed is the wrong word, because people get confused about that, but it sounded like it took the life out of the headphones. Now, that is, I guess, maybe part of the, it measuring really well and being super transparent, but I compared it to a bunch of other amps in that price range, and I preferred the other amps. In fact, I preferred many of the amps that were less expensive for that quality, the excursive quality. Again, not everybody cares about that. Like, I know a lot of people who, even when it comes to headphones, they're not looking for the excursive quality, and there's some people who get distracted by that. So I don't want to say, like, universally for everybody the A90 is bad, but for me it just was not my kind of thing. And apparently if you get a certain DAC for it, it might be okay, so it might be worth looking into that. But the D90 I actually really liked. So D90 yes, A90 I'm not so keen. But in general, I don't like to go, base the headphones on the DAC amp combo that you have, just because I think you get way bigger difference from the headphones in most cases, unless you're talking some high-end tube amps like the Amps and Sound stuff. So headphones from the A90, D90, well, you really can drive just about anything with that combo as far as, power is concerned. But I don't, and again, especially for that kind of stuff, it's not changing the sound in any meaningful way. So at that point, you're just really looking for what the best headphones are. I mean, I'd say it's not changing the sound in any meaningful way. It's not changing the frequency response in any meaningful way. So it's really just going to be whatever sound signature you want from the headphone, right? The point of those is to be more like transparent, linear, not change anything, which is fine, I think. Sorry, I gotta get back to some of these that I've missed. Rate this setup, please. D90 plus A90, Diana V2, LCDX, Focal Clear Professional, and soon Hi-Fi Man Aria. Man, you got a lot of headphones. That's awesome. Again, not a huge fan of the A90. Love the D90. It's one of the best implementations of AKM 4499, although, I don't know, people can't really get that anymore because, well, maybe you can find some, but the AKM stuff's going to be a while before it shows up in new stuff. Because there was a factory fire there. Diana V2, I heard it at CanJam, was not as impressed for the technical performance compared to the Diana Phi. But I haven't heard it at home, so I can't really give you an assessment of that. LCDX has ridiculously good technical performance for the price, but benefits from EQ. Focal Clear Professional, again, that's sort of my take on, I prefer the original Clear. And soon Hi-Fi Man Aria. Aria is excellent for a slightly brighter presentation, but it has really good sense of space and stage. And, you know, the depth and layering capabilities of that headphone is fantastic. It's funny, I did a little experiment with somebody who wasn't into any of this stuff, not an audiophile, not into hi-fi stuff. And I had him compare, without knowing the prices, I had him compare Focal Stelia and a couple of other lower end headphones, but mainly it was the Focal Stelia against the Hi-Fi Man Aria, and he vastly preferred the Aria because of the soundstage and space. So I know personally, I think the Stelia has better detail, but it's of course a closed back, right? So if people are indexing for soundstage, then yeah, the Aria is definitely going to be one of the better ones to choose. Let's see. Any closed back over ear in the range of 500, 600 are worth considering, or better to jump straight into something like Celesti? Yeah, I do think so. I think those Aeon RTs are probably worth considering. Now you're probably going to need an amplifier, a balanced amplifier for that, because those do take a bit of power in a good way to sound great. The Aeon X, oh man. Wait, I can't remember if the Aeon X is open, but whatever closed back Aeon is around $500 where they retuned it, that's probably worth checking out. Isn't Celesti dead after Chronicles review? That's just one person. He hates every Focal closed back, so I'm not. In fact, he hates all closed backs, which I don't. Closed backs are not as good as open backs. Like I will agree. But I disagree with the idea that all closed backs are bad. I think there are some that are better than others. And I do prefer some closed backs over IEMs. So, he has, we're fine disagreeing with one another, like I still respect his take. Because that's the other thing too, is that like when reading through his review, it's not like I disagreed with anything in particular that he said, except for maybe the imaging comment. Like I actually think that the imaging is totally fine. It's just that the whole thing is very narrow. And I said the same, I watched my review back as well, and I said many of the same things as far as the concerns about soundstage. So, I remember reading his review and going, yep. But none of that really bothered me with what the Celesti is. As far as, being closed back, being closed in, being a more intimate presentation, sort of not all that unexpected. Now, I will say that both the Radiance and the Stelia had a larger presentation, slightly. So if you're indexing hard for soundstage, you would probably be more well suited to going for either of those. All right, let's keep going here. Hopefully the Q&As help you out. Is LCDX versus EMF Aeolus, is it about reference hi-fi versus enjoyable, inaccurate, warm presentation? Or what is the trade-off coming from Ananda? Oh, all right. So for tuning, yeah, Ananda. So, okay, this is a tough one, but because the default LCDX tuning, depending on which one you have and when you got it, because again, they change depending on the year, there's unit variation, there's revisions and whatever, right? But if it's an older LCDX from like early 2020, the tuning's very strange. I'd say it requires EQ. And I did a video on that. The newer ones, from my understanding, is that they actually are much better tuned. Now, I can't say more about that, not yet, but yeah, there's, I would say you don't need to worry as much about newer LCDXs. For the ZMF Aeolus, I mean, and just to be clear on that, it's not like you would get any different sound. I would still EQ, you know, regardless of the tuning there. It's just that the earlier ones would require more of it. The Ananda is the closest in that to a reference kind of sound. But the ZMF Aeolus is one that I've briefly heard. I heard Tyler's, but I haven't actually had in for review. But it is one that I very much enjoyed when I heard it. And it's one that I think, while not reference, it still sounds good. So it still sounds great. So that's one where, like, you know, you could have a frequency response that is maybe not perfectly linear, like maybe the Ananda is, but it would still be good. And this is, again, why I stress in my videos that, you know, the reference target there, the Harman combined target that I use, is not it's not like the sole indicator for what constitutes good sound. It's just a known data point that we can then, you know, anchor other measurements to, right? So it doesn't have to match that target. All right, let's keep going. I know I've skipped some. I'm sorry if I've missed, so just ask again if I have. Still don't believe Amir's narrative that saber glare is caused by IMD hump. So that was his narrative. It's just the filter implementation by the engineer. It very much could be, but if that's the case, I don't know why you would do that. And so again, whether this is Amir's narrative or not, you can correlate that IMD hump with devices that have that glare. So again, maybe okay. Just because you can correlate it doesn't mean that that's the cause of it, because it could be the case that these are, as you say, filter implementations. But at the moment, that's sort of the only evidence that we have to go on, right? And when you start to observe this kind of behavior and then correlate with that data, it makes a strong case for it. So again, I don't think it's something we can be super confident about, but it is a fairly strong indicator that that correlation is true. But yeah, I'm not gonna. That's not the hill I'm gonna die on. How much does it sound leak from the LCDX? It's an open back headphone, so yes, it does leak. You were asking about the Monarch plus Mest, or plus Andro plus Monarch, or the Mest, and you said use U12T. Oh, you get the Tia Trios. Great, yeah, those are fun too. Will an entry-level amp like the Heresy or Liquid Spark be enough to power get the most out of the HiFiMan Aria? Well, no, because getting the most out of it would be, you know, getting that perfect synergy. Those are great amplifiers though, and you will be able to power that headphone no problem. So I think those are two different questions. But as far as power is concerned and amping, I think the Aria doesn't. It does require it requires an amplifier, but you don't need. It's not like an HE6. But yeah, like people will tell you if you want to get the most out of it, you need a tube amp, right? So it really depends. Like there's so much more to that question. Okay, let's see. Can you drive the LCDX without an amp? Yes, this is a very efficient headphone. Yeah, Aria is great. It's definitely a little brighter there, a little more counterclockwise tilted. But the space and stage character, it's fantastic. I really like it. Is it worth sending back my HD100S to see what the IER Z1R is all about? Even though I have the Tia Trio. No. I think it's worth keeping your HD100S. That's such a great reference headphone, the HD100S. Like, I know it's not my pick. I like the way that, you know, the planar sound of the Aria comes through a little better, but man, is the HD100S ever a good headphone. And it's crazy to think that it's been out for so long, you know, that it's still talked about and it's still, you know, a great reference point today. HD6XX most overrated headphone? Nope. I think it's great. I think it's a fantastic headphone for the price, and it does scale. I think there's better stuff out now that's also better value. Like I do think a Sundara and an amplifier is going to give you, a more linear sound if that's what you're after. But I really enjoy the 6XX for a dynamic driver headphone. I think it's great. Now, I would prefer the 600, but that doesn't, you don't have the 600 at that price, right? The 600 is a bit more expensive. Thoughts on ATH R70X? Weird comfort. Good sound, though. I need to get one in to review it. Yeah. Weird comfort. I did not like the way it was really uncomfortable for me. Yes, that is an Aeron chair. I feel like I've missed something, so I'm going to back up here. Trade-offs between ZMF. Oh, whoa. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Oh, it's not. Okay. I was like, what? So trade-offs between ZMF Aeolus and Lcdx 2020 revision coming from Ananda and Monolith 788. I got to say, guys, I really like the THX AAA amps. I like them a lot. You don't like the lack of slam currently. On the Ananda. Yeah, the Ananda definitely lacks slam. It's more of that sort of refined presentation that's more about stage and tuning and detail, less about visceral physical impact. So both the Aeolus and the LCDX. So are you considering buying a new LCDX? Because if you're buying a new LCDX, that's not the 2020, it'd be 2021. But both of those are going to slam harder than the Ananda. The Ananda technically, again, is going to have a better frequency response, but I think you're going to really like both of those as well. Oh, yeah, you asked that question. Okay, I already covered that. Man. Looking for an upgrade for my first headphone, 598, out of the Sandara and the K712 Pro. Which would you recommend? Oh, definitely Sandara, but you need an amplifier. You can't just run that, from a motherboard output or a laptop, unless it has an amplifier built in, because some motherboards do. But yeah, this is Sandara needs an amplifier, which is weird because you look at the impedance and it's low impedance, but it's also inefficient. So you got to look at both impedance and efficiency to get a sense of whether or not, or how much amping you're going to need. Let's see. Diana V2 easily won me over your Verite Open. Love the Verite, but it's overhyped. So with the Verite, the tuning is unorthodox, but it depends on the pads that you get. And I've actually gone back to using very minimal EQ because it is a sound signature that is not too difficult to get used to. Again, depending on the pads and the amp, which is weird. But so yeah, the Verite is one that I do keep coming back to constantly because it is a great all-rounder for technical performance. But I do also EQ a little bit, just with a few filters to get it closer to my target preference. But I need to hear the Diana V2. I haven't had a chance to get that in yet. You're considering the Cayenne HA1A Mark II for your Legia Sandara / Clear. It's a good match. It's a good amplifier because you can play with impedances, but the one thing I would caution you against is that it is a very microphonic amplifier to the point where if I had it on the same desk here, any slight movement, you would hear that coming through the headphones. You can hear the tubes, just even tapping on the desk that it's sitting on, you'll hear that. So that's a downside with the Cayenne HA1A Mark II, so to keep that in mind. It's less good for the Clear and the Allegia because it is going to boost the bass substantially for all the different impedances that you select. But with the Sandara, it would be totally fine. Do you think, actually for the Allegia, that might work out though, because you'd want to boost the bass. Do you think the Harman target with reduced bass shelf is achievable for open back headphones with currently used driver technologies without EQ? If so, which? Not totally sure what you're asking here, but you mean with reduced bass shelf, meaning the one from 2013 and not the one from 2018? Because in theory, you can achieve it, but there's going to be a ton of trade-offs there in achieving it. The closest that I've seen for the bass shelf there for the 2018 one was actually the Aurorus Audio Borealis. Now, it still rolled off, but it got closer to that kind of contour. Well, it's going this way, so it got closer to the contour, up to 80 hertz or down to 80 hertz. Whereas many of the other ones, they'll be just a little bit more linear. Like the Focal stuff extends really well in the bass, but it doesn't have that same shelf idea. So I do think it's achievable. It's more likely to be achievable through dynamic driver headphones than planars, unless there's some sort of filtering going on, or there's a number of different ways of doing it with a planar. But typically, you don't see that with planars. You just see really good bass extension. With dynamic driver headphones, you can kind of tune the driver resonance there for the bass to have that kind of shelf. These days, because there are a lot more headphones now that are being implemented. Like, for example, what you get with the ZMF Verite, that's a good example. It doesn't match that shelf, but you could get it to match that shelf. And it actually has more sub bass presence there than even the Focals. So now I get that it's kind of semi-open, so maybe you'd have to do something there to tune the driver resonance to get that shelf. But yeah, it is achievable without EQ. It's just that it's a challenge, I guess. Yeah. And it's also a challenge to kind of balance that with all the rest of the technical performance that you might want, because as I'm learning, headphone development is a whole bunch of trade-offs where you may really fall in love with a certain type of acoustic property that you then end up ruining when you try and get use the acoustic get the tuning to be the way that you would want it to be. And so it's trying to find, I guess, the best way of achieving the tuning that you want without sacrificing, over damping or that kind of all the rest of that stuff, sacrificing the technical performance. And it's the same thing is true with IEMs as well. I currently own the Aeolus LCD2 2021 Rosewood and Radiance. Wow, that's a good collection. Looking at recommendation on either Auteur or Verite Closed. Well, the Verite Closed is definitely more detailed. The Auteur is going to be more neutral. So it depends on what you want. I, out of those two, would probably take the Verite Closed. I really do like the detail there, and you can always just EQ. But it's also more expensive. So if you just want neutral, another interesting thing would be just the Auteur off of a tube amp. That would also be a lot of fun. But if you have an LCD2 2021 Rosewood and a Radiance and an Aeolus, it might be worth jumping up to like that next, tier of technical performance there. Which, by the way, like the ZMF Verite Closed is probably the most technically impressive closeback, barring, of course, the LCD XC for detail, because I think that's actually surprisingly close. But yeah, the tuning is always a big question with those. Not sure if you'll know the answer to this, but what would be the symptoms of a ruptured diaphragm on an LCD? It would sound super broken. I don't know if that would even work. I don't know if you can get sound out of that. Depends on the rupture, probably. It depends what it is. That's something I'd need to ask Matt Economist about. You'll probably really like 660S is good. No, I'm not DT 1990 is pretty harsh in the treble. Okay. I got to catch up here, guys. Guys, if I missed your question, just feel free to ask it again, because I'm trying to catch up. Favorite ZMF is Verite closed over open? Yes. I would also get the closed if I were getting a Verite today. Even though, yes, I do like the open. It's just I like it with EQ. Have you ever compared the Aria with the LCD3? No, I haven't, and it's worth getting into. I think more people need to. I need to learn more about the LCD3 because I haven't had a chance. Hey Resolve, I was going over Crin's headphone ranking list and I noticed he placed the AKG K612 Pro in the same tier as the HD6XX. Do you agree that they are similar in terms of overall performance? No. Crin's list is a snapshot. And he has said this as well. This is not a definitive thing. It's just a snapshot based on first impressions. There are things that the K612 Pro is going to do better than the 6XX at, and there's things that the 6XX is going to do better at. So it really depends on what you prefer. He's definitely he's distilled everything down into two categories. You could look at both of those categories for both frequency response and technical performance and identify so many different nuances in both of those categories that may resonate more with you than just what that category, that score represents. So I think that's kind of you need to look at that list as with a bit of understanding that it is just a snapshot. Just received the Focal Celeste. It's a great looking and sounding headphone. Yes, it is. Which CMF headphone is your favorite? Verite, but if I could get a Verite tuned like an Auteur, that would be my favorite. That's what I wanted to make at some point. How much better is Verite closed versus Stellia? I haven't had a Verite closed in for review. I've only heard Tyler's. It's not better, it's different. Better soundstage. Definitely better soundstage. Let's see what else. Yeah. The Focal Clear, the old one, the original, yeah, and that works well too with A90. Yeah, that would be fine because they don't really change that much because they don't require that much power. And the Clear is already a very dynamic and present headphone. So as much as I'm not a fan of the A90, I don't think it's going to change the Clear all that much. I can't comment on that. The new version of the Lcdx. It's not a new version. It's just they always continue to make improvements there for their headphones. So I just pay attention to their site and see when they have a blog. But I can't comment on any of that stuff. Best open back around $1,500. If you're interested in space and detail, HD800S. I mean, Aria is up there as well, but HD800S at around $1,500, yeah. Sandara don't do bass heavy genres well. For people claim otherwise, but with my IFI X bass on, it's still not there at all. Some people are bass heads, and then they bought a Sandara, and then that's just not the right headphone for them. The Sandara has linear bass. It's totally fine, and it extends all the way down to 30 hertz, but it's not it doesn't follow the bass shelf of the Harman target. This is why I think it's important to get into learn about how measurements work at the very least, so you can look at a frequency response graph and go, I'm gonna like this or I'm not gonna like this. At the very least, you'll know if you're not gonna like it. And if you're looking for a bass heavy headphone and you see a perfectly flat line there for the Sandara in a raw graph, that's not going to be bass boosted. It's not going to be the bass boosted thing you might want. Is it Motu M2? Yes, it is. I haven't been listening out of the Motu M2. It's mostly for being able to check my levels here. You can see when I talk into the microphone, it looks like it's not peaking there. Now I have it because I'm using OBS. I have to be, or it looks like I'm not clipping there. Yeah, but because I'm using OBS, I have to kind of make sure that balances out. LCD2 plus Hell. I haven't heard the Hell. I've researched that the Arias are better than HD800S at too many chapters. How is the build? HD800S is one of the most impeccably well built and refined headphones ever made. But I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to say which one I prefer because they both do well at different things. If you want a planar presentation with better instrument separation and tightness and control during busy passages, then the Aria. If you want a dynamic driver presentation that has the craziest soundstage of any headphone, then the HD800S. For detail, I'd almost want to give the edge to the HD800S for microdynamics and micro detail and, I guess those finer little nuances in the trailing ends of tones. But for the image clarity that you get during busy passages, once again, the Aria is going to give that to you. So take your pick. Can you make a breakdown video of the headphone marketing mumbo jumbo? Like, what is monitoring mixing reference headphone? Like, can reference headphones be used? Like, can reference headphone be used for mixing or others? Oh, that would be an interesting video to make. The biggest problem with that is if you put a sticker on your box or a label on your box that says it's a reference, you're going to enter into an entirely new category of potential customers. And so I think everybody wants to do that. But the problem is that the concept of neutral and reference hasn't really been figured out in any way beyond what Floyd Toole and Sean Olive have been working on, which is, with the Harman research to try and get out of the circle of confusion. Now, there's debate about that as well. And that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of the marketing mumbo jumbo, as you put it, is so prevalent, because they don't have to prove it. And that's a problem. But that's also one of the reasons why I like the research that's being done, because, this is why measurements matter. And companies that publish measurements of their stuff, that's always better than if they don't. But this is also why, like, you can't take that marketing stuff at face value. I've listened to, there was a headphone that I used to have, it's somewhere around here. The Andover PM50 came out a while ago. We did a video on the channel. They marketed it as a flat neutral reference headphone, but the problem is that it completely lacked ear gain. It had negative ear gain. So it was flat on a raw graph. And it means that they really just didn't understand, somebody in there, whether it was an engineer or in the marketing department, somebody didn't understand the difference between raw and compensated measurements. And this meant that, they thought that they achieved a flat neutral frequency response, but they'd actually put something out that was extremely dark and didn't sound anything like what a neutral reference headphone should sound like. So I think, at the very least, with the Harman research, all the information above 1K is pretty close to reference. Everything below that is up for debate. But I think in general, you do want some kind of base elevation around 120 hertz or 150 hertz. Whether or not you want that sort of scooped out lower mids, I'm on the fence. All right, let's continue. But that was a great question. Thank you for that question. Needs Sandara new comfy pads and HD6XX with OTL tube amp. I don't know what that is. And Node Acoustic 3? I'm not sure what that is. I'm sorry, I can't really give you any info on that. Yeah, there's a delay here, guys, because I'm trying to catch up. I'm trying to get through as many as I can. What about the Ananda detail retrieval versus ARIA? Okay, this is a very good question, because technically the Ananda has a better frequency response than the ARIA. And it took me a while to figure this out. But the Ananda, the main difference between the detail there and the sense of image clarity is that the ARIA has a better sense of layering and space and depth. And you really notice this during busy passages again, with music has a lot of stuff going on, complex stuff. You can you can distinguish between the different lines more clearly on the ARIA than you can on the Ananda. And again, it's not something that shows up right away. And that was to the point where I was like, wait, this costs more? This costs twice as much? How is that possible? And then I realized it's because it has so much more depth capability. And so, whereas the Ananda is a much more sort of like, it's got a good soundstage, good space, but it's more of a kind of flat image all the way around. And the ARIA is like, it's like a much more 3D image. That's sort of the best way I can describe that. So it's not really detail in the sense of microdynamics or micro detail. It's not really much difference there, but difference in definitely in terms of clarity and control with complex layerings. I feel like I'm gonna have to catch up here, guys. You guys are asking for I keep asking for the favorite ZMF headphone, but I guess I already covered that. What do you top three pick? What are your top three picks for closebacks? I think that's what you're asking. For soundstage openness and neutral to warmish tonality. Closebacks, you don't get great soundstage generally, and they're not very open. So I'm going to say you'd probably want to go with ZMF for that. ZMF Verite, and then ZMF Icon and ZMF Atticus for soundstage and openness and closebacks. I mean, that new Hi-Fi Man HER10P is the largest soundstage that I've ever heard, but the tuning is so, at least in a closeback, but the tuning is so bizarre. I would not recommend that one, at least on the one that I had here. How loud do you listen to music? It's always under 85 dB. The thing is, if you calibrate to 85 to 90, well, you can calibrate your whatever it is. Like I'm using the rig here to test how loud, the Gross rig to test how loud I listen, and I calibrated that at 94 dB, and then adjusted the test tone to 85 dB. And what I realized is that even if you have the test tone at 85 dB or 84, your music is never going to achieve that volume. You're never going to be listening actually at 84. So it's usually somewhere between 3 and 9 dB below what you calibrate at for a test tone, because music is not test tones. Have you measured sound level you listen to on your headphones? Yeah, I think that was that I just answered that question, I think. Is Reveal Plus worth it? It's $200 for LCDX 2020. It's free. Reveal Plus, as far as I understand, doesn't cost anything. Or do you mean Rune? Because Rune is worth it, but for different reasons. Reveal Plus, I think you could just get Equalizer APO, and that's what I've always done with it. But no, I wouldn't use Reveal Plus for the LCDX, because if you have one headphone with multiple revisions and variations to it, how are you going to develop an EQ profile that satisfies all of them? You have to learn how to do EQ yourself on those, I think. 789 over A90, yes, I would. THX AAA powerful enough for Aria, yes. Sony Z1R closed alternative to Hyphaman Aria or HE1000. No. Z1R I'm not a fan of. It has a weird like 9K. It completely misses concha interaction. That's sort of the issue that I have with it. Or it doesn't take concha interaction into account. THX for headphone tech is like THX for movies tech. It's time for it to die. I disagree. I mean, it's not for everybody. It's much more analytic and forward presentation. But if you want all the details, that's gonna give it to you. Thoughts on a mid-tier amp for Diana V2? I don't know. You want a lot of power. I would recommend the Kai IHA6 off of the balanced output, but also you could, again, 789 probably has enough. The Magnius probably has enough. Anything that's got a balanced output that has a lot of power would be good for that. You don't need to buy the $1,000 amps, to get it powered well enough. Those are for if you want, something else. Let's see. What are your top 3 picks for close back? Oh yeah, no, we did that one already. Thank you very much, Shooting Techie. Comfy pads recommendation for Sundara. Oh, that's the same question. HD6XX with OTL. Don't like it though. Any recommendations? What I should change or upgrade to? Comfy pads recommendation for Sundara. The problem is you can't change the pads on the Sundara. You probably shouldn't be changing headphone pads to different pads, because the pads dramatically change the frequency response. More so on the Sundara even than on anything else. Well, not anything else, but definitely on the Sundara. And one of the reasons for that is that when they tune the headphone, one of the key factors in this is the pad development. So if you're swapping that out to something else, then you're gonna mess that up. But I sympathize, because one of the concerns with the Sundara that I have is it doesn't have cup swivel, and this means that, especially for the older versions, the pads were thicker in the front and than they are on the newer versions, and that means that it kind of clamps down on your jaw if it's one of the older versions. But so I don't want to say go out and buy new pads unless you know that these are the, whatever the latest revision pads are, because they are a little more, tapered in the front. So if you know that you have an old one and you're, worried about that, it does help with the comfort. But if you don't know if you have an old one, then I don't want to say go out and buy new pads that are the same pads, because it won't necessarily help you. But I would not recommend changing the pads on the Sundara, unless it is going from the old ones to the new ones. I hope that answers your question. You don't like 6XX with OTL, so you'd want something probably, I'm guessing, a little bit more reference. and the Sundara would be that. Again, I think it's one other thing that you could look into potentially with the Sundara is if you're able to swap out the headband to something else. I know people have done that. Maybe do a Google search on that, because that might help with the comfort. And I don't know about the Sundara, but I know people did that with the Ananda. So that might be worth looking into. It's weird. Like every time I try and scroll a little bit, it like jumps. So that's no good. Could you share your EQ profile for the Focal LX? I don't have one really. I think it's excellent. Oh, Chad, thank you very much. That'll see that $1 is going to be, that's like, $640 here in Canada. So that goes a long way to helping us with our coffee purchases. I'll go get some coffee today after the stream. You prefer H200S over Aria? No, I prefer Aria, but for certain things, I prefer the H200S. But I think overall, like, I don't know, it's such a tough choice between those two. It's really going to depend on what aspects you prioritize. Again, I think for micro detail, microdynamics, for individual instrument lines, I think H200S is better, just a little bit. But for complex music, there's something about the planar control that I think gives it better clarity there. What are your top? Oh yeah, we've done that. I listen to 95 to 105 dB on my Utopia. That's bad. Otherwise, metal doesn't sound like metal. That's damaging. But see, again, I don't know if you actually do listen at 95 to 105 dB, because first it depends where you are taking that measurement. If you're listening to at 95 to 105 dB at 3K, that's not going to be 95 to 105 at 40 hertz. So I think it definitely is different. I can't listen for much, at any length of time above 90 dB. That's just way too loud. Oh, thank you very much, Sif. A word on chord DACs, for example, the philosophy of enjoyable versus analytical gear, smooth versus possibly fatiguing, clinical but accurate gear. For all the chord stuff that I've heard, I've generally liked it, provided that the synergy was good. So I think somebody made the mistake of having the head audio headphone running off of the chord Hugo, not the tabletop, just the regular chord Hugo, at CanJam last year, and it didn't give it enough dynamics. It was just like kind of a dead kind of sound, but with the right synergy, it was great. I really like the way that the chord stuff sounds. I liked the Dave, but it's ridiculously expensive DAC. I liked the TT2 for the brief moments that I heard that. I used to go to like the local shops that had those setups, and so it's from memory, right? I don't have an up-to-date take on the chord stuff, but every time that I've heard it, it sounded really good. It sounded very full, rich. I wouldn't say that it's the perfectly analytic kind of thing that maybe the THX stuff does, but their DACs I think that's where some of the differences between DACs start to matter a little bit more. Now, as far as enjoyable versus analytical gear, smooth versus fatiguing, clinical but accurate, I think that is going to depend on the person, but I also think that eventually the best sound, like just as a general statement, philosophical statement about what constitutes good sound, in my opinion, it is all the detail. It is a reference tuning, a even spectral balance, as Sean Olive called it in his research, as much as I wouldn't necessarily say that the Harman target is the way to go there, but something like neutral or even spectral balance. And the reason for this is because it's for a similar reason, but it's because in the speaker world, when you're working in recording studios, they are mixing and mastering on what they consider to be reference studio monitors as well. And so if you're trying to, I guess, get the most clear presentation. Notice I didn't say accurate or neutral. The most clear presentation. I think looking for something that's meant to be reference is a good idea. And no, I don't mean the DT1990. I mean something that's going to generally agree with what the studio reference speakers are used, or are what they are when they're used during playback for the mixing and mastering process. So if you're able to achieve that, then I think you're on the right track for good sound. And then you want to go for more technical performance stuff, where I do think the more detailed presentations are better. But it is an interesting question. I think it's an important one, because I know a lot of people who don't care about that. They want to listen to an HD 650, which has a little bit more relaxed and smooth treble, and then just be happy and never look at the internet again. And I completely get it. So this is just sort of me. I hope that answers your question there. Hey, Android's in the chat. What's up, man? I sent him one of my favorite headphones, the Drop Panda. I'm just kidding. I sent him the Panda, so he's going to review that. And just if anybody hasn't seen his take on it yet, definitely stay tuned to Audio Discourse for that. It's strange that the HD100 is still talked about given its age. Yeah, I tend to agree. But at the same time, it's one of the most impeccably well-designed headphones ever. So yeah, it's great. I haven't heard the Synxer. Haven't heard that. Best fun headphones that doesn't suffer too much from playing off of a smartphone. Harmonic Dyne Zeus. It's not for me, but the tuning is too warm in the bass. But a lot of people like that for fun. Best fun though. Actually, I'm gonna go with the something from Focal for for fun. Maybe Estelia, actually, because it's got that bass bump. But yeah, for punch and stuff like that, yeah, they're definitely up there. Kennard and Wodan review, nope, I won't be doing that. At least not anytime soon. Hey Martin, how's it going, man? Thanks for the $5. That's €5. It's much more than $5, especially in Canada. Very nice of you. Very kind of you. Hey, Andrew, do you see the Motu? Do I see that Motu M2 in the background? Yes, that is the Motu M2. I love this thing. This is so much better than the Scarlett Focusrite. Just for microphone use, and I'm using it also for the measurement rig. But for example, what I love about this, even just disregarding the fact that this has an OSD that shows me where my levels are at, the fact that it's got this the independent phantom power is awesome. But then of course this is a mono microphone, right? So you can configure that in here as well. But I haven't played around with it enough to do that. So I'll be playing around with that and give you probably a better answer the next one we do, because I always just force mono anyways in OBS. But yeah, I think it would probably be helpful if you had a stereo microphone as well, and then you could hit the mono button. Because I don't like stereo mics. They're weird. If no rhyme or reason. Thank you very much, Catalan. Any open backs with bass? I like the burr part. I don't know the term for it. Similar to Meze 99 Classics, for instance. My LCD2C are almost there, but not really. Thanks. So without spending any money, you can actually just EQ that up in the LCD2C. EQ 150 hertz, add a bass shelf at 150 hertz, so EQ all the information below 150 hertz up, and then you'll get that burr. But with that said, if you're looking to upgrade from the LCD2C, maybe a very high-end upgrade from that would maybe be something like the Rossen Audio Rad Zero, which, yeah, it's kind of like a smoother frequency response there in the upper mids, a little more relaxed in the upper mids, but it does also have really good bass presentation. I'm trying to think something else in that range that would have that burr. I mean, yeah, I really do think the Odyssey stuff like an LCDX would be worth going for, but then yeah, you'd want to EQ that up. in the bass, because planars, they don't have the bass shelf. Again, some of them do, but for the most part, they're just linear. I hope that answers the question. But yeah, if you want punch and slam, maybe again something from Focal, or actually the ZMF stuff is good for that too. ZMF Aeolus or Auteur would be good there as well. Let's see. I'll do a little bit more here. What are your thoughts on Aeon 2 closed? Mixed. I like it, actually. But for whatever reason, the one that I had here had some phase issues. So I hope they ironed that stuff out. And there were some seal issues with the pads. I think it's one of the problems with the Aeon stuff is that, the tuning with the filters is a bad idea. I think that front damping the driver is not good, even though, yes, it does help with some of that spicy treble. But B, the pad, the fact that those pads are so massive is a bit of an issue for me. But for a portable headphone, the detail is definitely there. It's definitely good. I'm really curious about the Aeon 2 Noir because I looked at the frequency response and that looks quite good. So that's the one that I would get if I were to get an Aeon 2. Also, I prefer the black over the red. But yeah, I'm definitely looking into the Aeon 2 Noir. Oh, Cahoon, thank you. Here's some Canadian pesos for half a cup of coffee. Appreciate the reviews. Thank you, man. I will get that half a cup. So I'm now up to 2. Oh, wow. Thank you, Jerome. $5 in now. What is microdynamics? Yes, I was going to get to that. I did not get a chance to yet. I did see it though. Thank you though. What is microdynamics? Okay, this is a great question. Microdynamics and macrodynamics are old terms that people have used in other areas that then sort of got co-opted into, the audiophile headphone world. And on their own, I don't think they mean all that much, but the way that they have been used in this space, I guess, is for microdynamics, it's small details, so small gradations of volume. And I've always liked to use the analogy to looking at a color spectrum or color gradient. And if you look at a color gradient and there are very few shades in the gradient, you're going to notice the difference between the shades a lot more strongly. And then if it's just one shade, then you don't see any difference in the gradient. And so if something has poor microdynamics, it's as if it has fewer shades in the gradient, where the finer little nuances and trailing ends of tones get dominated by other shades, right? You kind of miss the small little bits of volume there. And this I found has a very strong contribution to the overall sense of detail. And so to describe a headphone that lacks good microdynamics, the Drop Panda, it's one where it just sounds like all the finer little nuances are lopped off and dominated over by, the sort of one note kind of trailing ends of tones. Another good example of that is the Beyerdynamic Amaron Home, or the AirPods Max is like that as well. And most of those wireless ANC headphones are like that, where they don't have any sense of that finer little nuance detail, low level information detail. Macrodynamics, on the other hand, is something that has often been correlated with punch and slam, or the excursive quality of the driver. But that is something that it's actually an acoustic property that is really difficult to nail down, because you can't really measure it all that well, because so much of it has to do with the pads and the way that they seal on the side of the head, and all that stuff. And so how the air pressure works. So it's not a very straightforward answer there. But to give you an example, headphones that have really good macrodynamics and sense of punch and slam and impact, even though they're not bass boosted, is the Focal headphones that use this sort of hybrid style diaphragms. There's the M-shaped dome diaphragms, and hybrid style with independent surrounds, like the ZMF stuff as well. They generally have really good punch and slam. Fostech stuff generally has really good punch and slam. Stuff that has very bad or poor punch and slam or macrodynamics, hi-fi man, Ananda, and most of the DCA stuff as well, because it is also related to other acoustic properties. I hope that answers your question. So I mean, whether we're talking microdynamics or micro detail, I kind of loop it all into one, but that trailing end sense of detail is essentially the way I would describe it. Jeff, thank you very much. Love the show. Thanks. How can I get into EQing on Mac? Very good question. If I remember correctly, somebody did mention it in one of the last live chats. So if you're here again today, definitely mention it again. But there is software that you can use to EQ on a Mac. But I do recommend Rune for this. Rune actually has better EQ implementation than EQ APO. Now, it does cost money for Rune, and I'm not a fan of getting people to just spend more money, for something that isn't tangible. But if you don't have to, and ideally, if you find a free version that allows you a free way of EQing, that's better than paying to do it. But Rune is something that if you are really serious about your music, it's worth getting, I think, because of not just the EQ functionality, but like everything else that it offers as far as like, the organization of all of your different music sources. It's fantastic. And then being able to, have that sort of integration with different endpoints and stuff like that. It's awesome. But with that said, the latest update for Rune made the EQ functionality so good that I'm at the point now where most of my EQ is done in Rune. Or I'll do EQ and Equalizer APO, and then I will just build another profile for it in Rune. Audiourvana, somebody's saying Audiourvana, so that might be the way to do that. But thank you very much. LCD2C versus LCD2 with phaser. Definitely LCD2 with phaser. That the LCD2C is better tuned than the LCD2 with phaser, but the LCD2 with phaser, I'm saying LCD2F here, is the one that is definitely more detailed. LCD2 Classic is that's the one that they were originally going to make for drop, I believe. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong about that, but and then it was going to be I think a lighter, less performant LCD2, and so I'd go LCD2 phaser every time and just EQ that. Rune is so damn expensive, but so worth it. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Wouldn't Soundwave? Thanks very much. Wouldn't a headphone that perfectly matches an individual's HRTF be the most detailed one? How is detail separate from FR then? There's two questions there, and they're both good ones. So the orthodoxy would say that detail is captured by FR, but nobody's analyzing FR in terms of detail, at least not the kind of detail that we're talking, that subjectivist audiophiles are talking about. So it's a really difficult thing you can't look at an FR graph and say here's the detail and here's where the detail is missing. It doesn't. I mean, maybe it's there, but nobody is doing that analysis. And I'd like to one day maybe do that if it's true. I'd like to find out if that's true. I think one of the problems with that as well is that when we are talking about stuff like detail and microdynamics, we're talking about subjective quality or qualities of the subjective experience. We're not talking about acoustic properties. And so there's no such thing as an acoustic property that is uniquely correlated to detail or microdynamics or, all the rest of this stuff. There are various different parameters that you can tweak in a headphone that will contribute or correlate to the subjective experience that we then describe as detail. But how you get there, I mean, there's going to be different ways of doing that. So talking about headphones being more detailed or less detailed based on their FR, it doesn't make as much sense when really what we should be talking about here is how various different acoustic properties in the headphone contribute or correlate to the subjective experience that we then describe as detailed, if that makes sense. But to then go back up one step towards, getting the headphone that perfectly matches an individual HRTF, we also don't really need to worry about that as much because, yes, we do want the headphone to match what the brain expects to hear. And I think that's sort of what you're asking, right? And if you get a headphone that perfectly matches what the brain expects to hear, you're going to get something that sounds extremely clear. It's going to sound the most tonally correct. And so a great example of this would be the AKG K371. That's a headphone that sounds very tonally correct. It sounds very close to what the brain expects to hear, at least above 1K or above a 900 hertz, which is like, yeah, that's where the ear gain stuff happens anyways. It doesn't happen below that. Now, I love that headphone because it has an excellent frequency response, but in no way does it compete with, for technical performance, for detail, what we're calling here subjectively, detail, with, Hi-Fi Man Sundara or Sennheiser HD6XX or, Focal, whatever, right? They're not on the same playing field whatsoever, and you notice it right away. With that said, one of the cool things that it's fun to play around with is, I've been working on a bit of a project with a friend of mine, who's done some 3D printing for he's 3D printed a headphone, and what he did was he put the Timpani driver in there, the one that's in the Kennerton Valley, I think, and didn't do any damping whatsoever. Now, I don't want to talk too much about this because it's his project. I just sort of did some measurements for him basically and created a EQ profile, but the tuning definitely was a bit strange there, and he's still working on it. But without any damping in there, it was actually really impressive how good the detail was there. So if you're not adding constraints to the acoustic properties of the driver, you can get really good performance. So it's just something else to keep in mind, I guess. But then the point of that is to say that when you do tune the headphone and you're trying to get the frequency response that you want, you are adding acoustic constraints in many cases. Not all, but in many cases, especially more so for closed back headphones. I don't get the fascination with Rune, overpriced with very little benefit. I disagree, man. Rune is something where, like, if I'm listening seriously, I will always use it over any of the other players. And partially because of how good its EQ functionality is. It's just easy to use. Blaine, thank you very much. I have Sundara's and SH9 amp. Is that an SMSL thing? I'm not sure what SH9 is. And I want to expand. I'm not sure whether to buy a DAC or get a DT 1990. Well, I can't in good conscience recommend a DT 1990. I don't think that's a very good headphone for its default tuning, at least not without EQ. So again, I would recommend it with EQ, but you got to get into that if you're into it, because the treble on that thing is so insane. And I went over this in the last live stream that we did. I don't think, even for professional studio use, that it's a good idea to use as a reference point. Now, you could still use it for trying to figure out where the issues are, where the flaws are, and where things are, too sibilant, and then correct for that. But it's like I said in the last one, like if you're editing, you're color grading on a monitor, why would you prefer a monitor that accentuates one color spectrum dramatically? So it doesn't make sense to me. Instead of the DT 1990, maybe this can help a little bit. I would look at getting a Focal Alex if you can spend a bit more, or spend a bit less. Get the you have the Sundaras. Yeah, I would save your money and then get something that's actually worth the upgrade from that. What's the difference between formless transducers like those among Focal's lineup and more traditional electrodynamic designs? So it's not actually unique to Focal, like the idea of reducing the mobile mass, but they have made a big deal about that, the formless design. But essentially, if you take the voice coil, traditionally that's wound around a cylinder, and what they've done is they've figured out a way to remove that cylinder, and so there's no former. Or frameless or whatever else, right? You see this type of terminology show up in other, designs as well. But the benefits is that you get it's a reduction in weight essentially. And so if you think about what a diaphragm does, it's excursive and restorative force for the diaphragm, and that's what creates the pistonic motion. And if it's much lighter, then it's going to have an easier time reacting quickly with excursive and restorative force. So again, all just acoustic parameters. That's one of them. Have you tried the GSX Mini by Headamp? No, I have not. detail retrieval based on FR. Those are weird people. Not necessarily. It's not based on FR. It's the assertion is, or suggestion is, that it is likely captured by FR. And so it's not like nobody is saying that it's you can look at FR graph and, and get the detail from it. Unless you're somebody who thinks that more treble equals more detail, because there are some people who think that. That's just not true. But I mean, that's just a subjective quality, right? FR can affect perceived detail if, for example, there's a lack of FR in high frequencies, which people perceive as detail. So that is true. I will say, so there is a relationship between FR and the perception there of detail. But I would argue that that's also the perception of clarity, because again, the AKG K371 is a great example of this. Fantastic FR, middling detail, right? Less detail than something that has a worse FR. But this is also one of the reasons why an LCD2F with EQ is going to sound more detailed than most other headphones, every other headphone I've heard at that price. But without EQ, it can sound less detailed than a K371. So there's no way he's going to read this. Read what? See, I didn't read it. I read that there's no way you're going to read it, and he's going to read this. Any thoughts on the Focal Clear MG Pro? Well, I can't comment on the Clear MGs, but yeah, the Clear MG Pro, as I mentioned earlier, I prefer the original. But it's still a good sounding headphone. It's still a Focal Clear, but I straight up prefer the original Clear. That's just my personal take. The Clear Pro is like a little more relaxed there in the lower treble, and Clear MG Pro is a little more relaxed there in the lower treble, and is then a little more U-shaped. Upgrades to HD6XX and Sandara, which kinda includes both of their benefits. I missed the treble dynamics in the Sandara. Yeah, probably an Alex. Or I know Metal 571 would take the Sandara over the Alex, but I don't know. The Alex is that's a great headphone. Not if you want good soundstage though. That's something else to consider. Probably an LCD2F with EQ or an LCDX with EQ. But that's a substantial upgrade. No, I have no opinion on the Olo S4X. I have not had a chance to review it. What headphones would you go to for Gogo Penguin? Hi-Fi Man, Ananda, or Aria. Well, Hi-Fi Man Susvara if I had one. The Gogo Penguin has some of the best recorded piano tone that I've heard. So I would probably go with something like that. It's a little bit more forward in the upper mids. Has good ear gain. Oh wait, did I Akko reviews? I don't know who that is. I see you, Akko. Okay. Sorry, I should probably know. I feel bad. Could you maybe look at CSD or waterfall graph for detail or micro detail? What should be included in that? So the answer is no, but what should be included in that list is all the other stuff like square wave and impulse response and all the other different metrics. Not that they don't capture something interesting, or something that might be correlated to the experience, but CSD and waterfall graphs, as many people have now pointed out, likely don't mean what people think they mean. And I know there's arguments on both sides, and I spoke with Grover about this as well, Grover Neville, on this channel as well. We got a live stream there where we talked about it, but speaking to a lot more people on the subject and reading a lot more on the subject, you find that CSD, while it tells us something, it doesn't tell us anything unique that isn't available in frequency response, because headphones are minimum phase devices. Now, there are probably going to be some cases where they do tell us something interesting, and I think the truth of this lies somewhere in between either sides of those arguments. But the scientific orthodoxy on the subject does indicate that CSD is, because time domain is proportional to frequency response, when you fix something in frequency response, you fix it in the time domain. And headphones are supposed to be minimum phase devices, so it shouldn't really tell us anything that isn't already there in frequency response. Now, yeah, again, I think we now live in an era where people are developing headphones that maybe they're less minimum phase. They're not perfectly minimum phase. Maybe that's why this debate is still ongoing. But I don't have a clear-cut answer for you on that one, unfortunately. But I know it's definitely not for micro detail. But I get why you would ask that, because that could, in theory, indicate something to do with the damping. But yeah, I don't think it tells us anything all that interesting, because there's so many counterexamples for micro detail, especially in planars, where they show a massive wall there, like a resonance there. It's just it's not audible, and it's not really contributing to detail either. H100S, best detail retrieval of any headphone? No. Best detail, I'm going to rank it, okay? Best detail retrieval that I've heard. Shangri-La, no, I'm just kidding. So apart from those $50,000 headphones, the best detail that I've heard in a headphone, Hi-Fi Svara is equal with Abyss AB1266 Phi TC at Can Jam. So I didn't have it in. Those two are insane for detail. Then below that, I would put LCD4. And that, but again, depends on when you got it, which LCD4, because there's revisions and stuff. Then there's Focal Utopia, Final Audio D8000 Pro, and then HE1000 SE I would put maybe even ahead of the Utopia for detail, but the frequency response there is pretty crazy too. So, and that's really why I like this Svara. It's the crazy detail flagship headphone, nanoscale planar, that doesn't have a weird frequency response, and all the rest of them kind of do. So when we listen to AB1266, I have heard it twice, 3 times. It's very detailed as well. I do have a list of reference tracks. It's on the Headphone Community Forum, and just search for this forum.headphones.com and search for test tracks. That's why somebody was asking about Gogo Penguin, I think. Oh, Senior. Gotcha. Okay. Sorry, I missed that. That's the thing. I think people think that, like, there's... I don't know. I have to bring something up regarding the GL2000, and I think a lot of people thought that I had some feud with the people who liked it, and the reality is I don't watch reviews before I do a review of anything. And I know Chrono doesn't watch anything. Like, he doesn't participate in that, community as much. Like, he participates in the community on the forum, but he's not, he doesn't watch a lot of reviews. And for me, like, I'm kind of like that as well, where, like, I do watch reviews. I watch Josh's stuff. I watch DMS's stuff. I like those guys. Obviously, I watched Metals when he was still doing it, but for the Zeo stuff, I hadn't watched that video. I didn't know what anybody else was saying about it, and I think that's kind of important to not have your opinion be too skewed by what other people say. So I watched part of it afterwards, so now I understand why. Because I remember I published a video and I was like, I know a lot of people like were saying it was the greatest thing ever, but I didn't realize exactly where that was coming from. I just knew in the comments and all my other videos that everybody was like, what about this one? What about this one? And then that's why I was surprised, to say the least. Best open backs for $500 for hip hop, R&B, and pop rock. Under 500. There's really nothing at the $500 price mark that's like compelling over the Sundara and an amplifier. So Sundara and an amplifier, that's around $500. You don't like Theus? No, I have nothing against him. I mean, I think he's wrong, but I mean, there's all kinds of people I disagree with. So disagreement doesn't require some sort of, anger or vitriol. Like, I think there are people who get that, but I don't care that he said something else that something that contradicts what I've said. Doesn't bother me. DMS called the GL2000 a headphone worth $200. I mean, so I agree with a lot of what DMS said in that video, but I've disagreed with DMS in the past about other stuff too. Like, DMS and I don't always align either. Kryn and I don't always align. Metal 571 and I don't always align, right? The one thing with that, though, that I will say is that there are reviewers who I am confident are trustworthy in the sense that they know what good sound is. They know what stuff's supposed to sound like. And while I may disagree about certain things here and there, the general trend is reliable. And people like Crin and Metal 571 are, on that list. And then there are others who I don't know if they know what good sound is or what things are supposed to sound like. And for those, even though, I don't have anything wrong, I don't think there's anything wrong with their videos, I don't have any issues with what they're doing. I'm not going to go to them for, opinions on stuff. So people who I like to watch, I like DMS and I like Josh's stuff. They're both, and I'll disagree with them too, as I mentioned. Like DT 1990, I definitely disagree with both Josh and DMS on that one. But I still like to watch their stuff. But no, as far as the rest of the landscape goes, I don't participate all that much in, I don't watch Olive's videos, for example, because, his Sundara sound demo and that whole thing, that is a perfect example of like why I'm like, I don't know what he thinks. I have no idea what his reference is. I know his reference is HD 600, but I don't know if he knows what stuff's supposed to sound like. Android, I don't align with Resolve either. He likes the Panda so much that he wanted to share love. You don't like it as much as I like it. Man, you must really hate it then, because I thought it was one of the worst sounding headphones. Not the worst, like the worst headphone I've ever heard. So the Andover PM50 is up there for worst sounding headphone. There's a few headphones: Campfire Cascade, Andover PM50, what else? Oh, the Aeon 2 Open is up there. But they've since changed that with different pads. So the Aeon 2 Open actually thinks a lot better now after the pad change. So that's good at least. Trying to think what else. It feels weird to say that, but there are definitely some that I've heard where I go, what on earth? Yeah. For IEMs, worst IEMs that I've heard, that Drop X Zeus thing was pretty bad. There's some IEMs that I think are, the RHA CL2 planar. Man, that was bad. Like it had good detail and good technical performance, but man, was the tuning wrong. Ultrasound, yeah, the ultrasound thing was not the worst that I've ever heard. I wouldn't put it in that category. It was just real weird, like, and warm and somewhat disjointed. Oh, now we're talking about Zeus. I don't have this people think there's a feud, and then there really isn't one. I don't think he gives a damn about what I'm doing, and it's totally fine. I don't really care what he's doing either. Any thoughts on Sony MDR Z1R? Not for me. Zeus also restated recently very, very strongly that a $4,000 DAC doesn't sound better than a $100 DAC, period. Maybe not to him. I don't know. Well, it depends on the $4,000 DAC. Maybe there are some $4,000 DACs that don't sound any different. I don't know. Again, I couldn't tell. Oh, wait, is that the Hollow May thing? I think Tyler was talking about that. I still haven't watched that video. Wanted to go around 1.5K. Recommend me going with Sundara kind of sound, but better treble and bass. Need a little bit of slam. Learn the EQ now. Similar to Sundara. Better treble and bass. Hi-Fi Man Aria, but it doesn't have the slam. So if you want the slam, that's tough. 1500. EQ'd LCDX. We all align with metal. Yeah, actually, metal and I align for the most part. Android and I align for the most part. Crin and I kind of do in many cases, and he is somebody I definitely trust. But there are also a lot of cases where we don't align. Which again is totally fine. I still Like, I would consider Kryn a friend, and I think what he's done with, his tuning for the Blessing to Dusk is it's amazing. Oh man, I didn't realize mentioning Zeus would be that dramatic. Thoughts on Bluetooth headphones under $500? So after EQ, the XM4, yeah, I like the features. Bluetooth, so not necessarily noise canceling. The Odyssey Mobius is the clear winner there, in my opinion at least. But it's not noise canceling, so if you need noise canceling, that'd be something else. It'd be maybe there's that AKG thing, N700 I think, and then there's a few out there. I think there's also the Bose 700, which it's weird in the upper mids or lower treble. And then the XM4, which is insane for its default frequency response. But the EQ function actually works great, and I love the features of it. So I still wouldn't write that one off, even though I didn't like it. Zeus didn't like the clear. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. Zeus has covered all the good products. However, don't make any buying decisions on his recommendations until you have researched and waited for the hype to die down. So I do think that is a problem. But it's not unique to him and his stuff. Like, there's this thing, even stuff that I've done in the past, where if you really like something, it shows and it creates hype, and that hype needs to probably be tempered. And I love what DMS said about this actually in his GL2000 review, that stuff that is flavor of the month will eventually die down, and we'll be talking about something else in the next few months. So, and we've seen it before, and we'll see it again. I think he's definitely the catalyst for a lot of the hype, the flavor of the month hype stuff. But I think that's also just the nature of it because he's got a big channel. So this is also why I think it's really like my project with this channel is to help people learn about stuff more so than I'm not trying to convince people that one thing is better than another. I don't care about that. Like, it's much more interesting to try and communicate, to people, how to get a better sense for yourself, or communicate to people what something's going to potentially sound like for them, so that they can make, the right decision. But it's not, it's much more about education, I think. And this is why I try and, get people to learn how to read frequency response and use it to their benefit, because that way you don't have to rely on me or Zeus or DMS or anybody else for the subjective stuff. You can just look at the data and then figure out whether or not it gets close to, what you might prefer. With that said, I do think that there is there is such thing as good sound across the board. And I don't think that it's all just relative and all just preference. I think because we're all humans, we need a certain amount of ear gain, for example. And we also, we know that diffuse field tunings are not great. That was proven. Like, some people might like it if you're an outlier, but most people don't. So, there's stuff in that research that I really think is valuable. It's worth it. Okay, guys, I'm going to do 2 more questions. And then I got to go get some lunch because I'm dying here. Let's see. Z tends to favor cheaper gear. It's like he's biased against the cost of expensive gear. So this gets into the whole question about affiliate links and whether or not that requires that people are dishonest, because I think what you're getting at here is that, like, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I think one of the ways to read that is to say, if you're more into cheaper gear and into promoting cheaper gear, and you have affiliate links for that, you're much more likely to get sales out of that than if you're promoting, high-end gear, because fewer people are going to buy it. So there is definitely a monetary incentive to promote the less expensive stuff. But I also have to stress that just because somebody uses affiliate links, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to be dishonest. It just creates an incentive. And the question that I think is worth asking there is, does the incentive influence the content. And so my take on this is that it doesn't have to. There are so many examples where it doesn't. I think DMS is a great example where it doesn't. And there's lots of, you can, not just in headphone stuff, but just all over the place. There's lots of examples where it doesn't. So it's really up to the viewer to look at a trend and see whether or not that's going on, or the degree to which that framing effect is influencing their takes. Because, so for example, I'm into photography and cameras and stuff like that, and I used to watch all these photography channels, and then I realized that some of them were heavily shilling stuff that they had links for. And this is sort of the common practice for this, and that's why what we're doing is so different, and people are sort of unsure and uncertain about that, because it's worth asking that question as well. Like, where's their incentive? They're not using affiliate links. And it's true, we don't use affiliate links, but I don't think we can just say you write people off just because they're using affiliate links, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. And even Zeos or other people who are doing it, like, I'm not going to sit here and say that he's dishonest because he uses affiliate links. I just disagree with his opinions about stuff. And I don't think it's fair to say, because he benefits from cheaper, people buying cheaper stuff, that he's necessarily going to be shilling it. So I don't think that's what's happening. I think he genuinely likes the GL2000. So just to make that clear. Need FR reading part 2 video, maybe a live video. What else would you like to know about reading FR? I mean, the other video that I've had on my mind is how to, why frequency response matters, and why. So less about how to read it and more why it matters. And the idea behind that is to talk about the relationship between fundamental and harmonic tones, and how this contributes to getting things to sound more correct, and having the balance for fundamental and harmonic, having a good balance there, how that correlates to things sounding more correct. That would be the next, I guess, stage of that FR video. But I really do think there are two reasons why FR matters. One is because it's predictive of sound quality. So you're going to be able to see, is this super weird or is this, good sounding? In the broad strokes, right? You're going to be able to tell at the very least if something sounds bad, if the FR is super weird. But the other reason is that it's going to let you know, like, you can tell what your own preferences are to a certain extent. So when you look at an FR graph, again, I was talking about this earlier, if it has a bass bump or not, and then if you want a bass bump, then you would go with the one that has it, right? So that's kind of where I see that being, and so on, right, for the rest of it as well. But that's sort of how I see FR being useful. I'm not sure. Sandara pad swaps. Don't even get me started. I actually have. Okay. This back here, you can't see it, but I have a Sandara from 2018 that has the old pads. Actually, let me see if I can put that up on the screen here, because I now finally have a measurement of the Sandara with the old pads. Well, let's give it a shot. Let me try it here. This could look really weird for a second. Measurements. You guys are going to have to talk amongst yourselves for a second while I grab this measurement. So I guess one of the rudest things you can do is be like, I'll be right back, but keep talking. All right. So this is the Sandara from 2018 with the old pads, right? So it has this dip here. This is just the left side. I'll still do the right side. This is also where the pad, you can see the roll off here is dependent on seal. So even on the old one, it's dependent on seal. Even the old one measures well. It's just that it's the upper mids are more pronounced as a result of the lower mid contour here. Let me just grab the newer one. And and this was kindly sent in by one of the community members. And so big thanks for sending that in, and I will send you money for shipping shortly. All right, and here's the other one. So it's much more filled in there for the upper mids, but there are also other differences that I've seen from, because I think that there was definitely a revision, and Hi-Fi-Man's now finally said yes, there has been a revision for the pads, and they talked about it being different adhesive material and stuff like that for the pads. They physically look different, right? So the pads physically look different, but I do think that there was also, like, way back in 2017, maybe even earlier, I think there was a driver revision, and this is something that Fang Bian has also talked about. He didn't say specifically there was one. He said, I can promise you we haven't made a driver revision in over 1 calendar year, and that was in 2020. So that indicates that they did do one at some point, but I can't verify that. I don't have that. I don't have a headphone from way back then. ASR is scary. Why is ASR scary? Does it make sense to get the flattest headphone possible and equalize them to your preference instead of getting headphones with the preferred response? You could do that. That's the problem is that people don't know what stuff is supposed to sound like. If you're just coming at it cold and you're like, this is the first headphone you bought, high-end headphone you bought, like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you'd be able to actually get it to sound good, because you can go sound blind, like you need a reference point. Some really funny comments here. Amir always has objective reasons for saying something is good or bad. I think he needs to so I think he needs to just take a wider view of it, though, right? I'm not saying that the data that he puts together is bad. Like, I'm fine with the data. I use data. But I think he just needs to he needs to go wider on the experience, and then I think it would end up being more scientific. It's just ironically named. And I still want to have him on the live stream at some point. So if anybody has ties with Amir, put a word into his ear, because I would love to have a chat with him. Okay, well, one more question. I see. Oh, wow. Thank you, Derek. Thank you for the honesty, effort, and integrity. I absolutely enjoy the master classes you provide on these live Q&As. Enjoy some French fries. Actually, I'm on keto right now, so I'm, French fries will have to wait until I'm done that, but thank you very much. I'll get some keto French fries. Praying for your neck. Oh, God. This is not bad. The LCDX is fine, I find. And the new XC that I got in is, with the carbon cups, is also, it's only like 680 grams or something, so it's not too bad. I mean, yes, it is too heavy still, but it's not the 750 grams from before, which is nice. Your Sandara died. Yeah, this is always an issue still with Hi-Fi-Man, I think. Oh, a lot of the ASR guys on the forum who are culty. Yeah, I mean, they're the people who look at a Synad, chart and buy the best thing because it's best on Synad. That's dumb. I don't know. Like, I don't have anything else to say about that. That just seems like people missing the forest for the trees. But I don't think he would do that. Like, I think that's just something he can show. I think that's the issue, is that he just tries to, I guess, base conclusions too hard on measurements, which it's important to use, because it's our visual representation that cuts across our own subjective biases and framing effects, and that's why I think it's important to use and understand, and that's why I do that. But I don't think you should base your conclusion solely on that. I think you should base your conclusion on how it sounds. mere epistemology is bad philosophy in general. His data is okay, but he does botch it sometimes. I haven't followed it closely enough to see whether or not he's botched it. I do have issues with only using, like, I completely agree with Jude on if you can show symmetry for headphones. If they do have symmetry, you should show it. And he definitely didn't do that on the Diana V2 thing. So I think he needed to. I think he needed to find out where the seatings matched, and then because I bet they do match. It's just that's such a weird headphone for the coupling. Because even when I measured it, I was able to get it to match. So not the V2, the Phi. I was able to get it to match, and the fact that his were so not matched, I was like, what? And you got to take more than one seating. If you just take one seating, that's bad. I'd be curious to hear it from his perspective, why he thinks that's a good idea to have just one seating. I think there's an argument there for it, but I think the counter arguments are stronger, especially because he's still in the 711 standard, which I am as well. But you know, that does have its limitations. Yeah, I think it'd be great to have him on. You know, I think the more conversations, the better. And from what I understand, he is not. And this is where I got it wrong initially, and I need to apologize to him because I made the wrong-headed assumption that he would have been like some of the people that kind of spill out from that forum into different places, where they say things that are just like outright false, and it's because they've been sort of indoctrinated into the, you know, indexing hard for measurements thing. And yeah, that. I don't think he's actually like that. Like, and I honestly, after reading some more of his sort of descriptions about headphones, he does give subjective impressions too. So, I don't have, you know, there's no vitriol on my end. if there was any confusion, it's more just that I think that there's a disagreement about method, and that's fine. It's just I'd love to have that conversation. Okay, guys. Rebel. Oh, here we go. Rebel amp versus A90. I know Rebel is your choice. Any description to it? And is it possible to change op amps on A90? I don't know about that last part. I only listened to the Rebel amp for a little bit, but I'll probably get it in again for. I'll grab it from the office at some point so I can listen more. But yeah, it's much more dynamic. Actually, watch Max's video on that because he's right. It's much more. Yeah, impactful than the A90. But I'd only listened a little bit, and it was like, you know, unplug, plug the other. It was right one next to the other. I just use an ES100 for IEMs because I'm on the go when I use IEMs, so it's maybe not the right answer you're looking for. But guys, I'm going to take off. Thanks so much for tuning in, and thanks to everybody who participated in the super chat. You guys are awesome. I will go and get a ton of coffee now with that. Or at least I'm going to go get a ton of coffee. I'm not sure it's going to be with that exactly, but you know what I mean. But yeah, big thanks to everybody once again, and we'll see you guys in the next live stream that we do. I'll try and have more guests on. This week we just didn't have any guests and it didn't work out. So look forward to more videos from the new studio, which is, there's been some growing pains there because it's not as soundproof as I would like, but we'll get there. So yeah, thanks again, everyone.